Welcome to episode 28 of Shifty Perspective. We're joined live by two guests today who both happen to be brothers, one of which has been a recurring guest on our podcast. And I'm very happy to finally have both of the brothers, the Hupli brothers, Aleksi and Antti, here today. Today, we're going to be talking about addiction, psychedelic therapy, drug policy. Of course, if you're tuning in live, feel free to ask any questions in the comments. And yeah, if we will try and cover as much as we can in this time. The first things first, let's start off. Well, Aleksi, you've been here before, so maybe Antti, you'd like to go first and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Antti. I'm a medical doctor. I'm currently working in Helsinki Youth Center. We're helping 13 to 23-year-olds mental health, who has mental health problems or addictions. And like you said in the introduction, I'm also one of the only doctors, or only doctor in Finland, who is doing the Compass Pathways training for psilocybin-assisted therapy and MAPS training for Mdma-assisted psychotherapy. And I'm also doing CROF, transpersonal psychology, holotropic breathing, facilitator training, and I've done MBCT training, so mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and I'm also doing a hypnotherapy, cognitive hypnotherapy training at the moment. So that's pretty much it for now.
Wow, very, very busy. So actually, before I go and answer your questions, Aleksi, for anyone who's new here, probably best for you to introduce yourself also.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be on your Shifty Perspective once again. I think it's my third time now, so I must be saying something right in the previous ones. I'm doing my PhD in Sociology at the moment at the University of Tampere. It's in review, so hopefully I would hear in a month or two whether that's being accepted. It's been focusing on cognitive enhancement drug use among students. But while I've been doing my PhD, I've been also quite active in drug policy activism, and also been doing a few kind of evaluation studies about, for instance, the EU drug strategy. And also there was a cannabis project that was developing different tools for professionals to ease their communication with young people about cannabis. So I did an evaluation study of that, and that came out late last year. So I've been also relatively busy in this field.
So did you both get into this topic kind of at the same time, or who was first, or how did you both kind of go down the same pathway with drugs?
I think Aleksi was the first and I followed later.
Yeah, I'm a couple of years older than Antti, so I think I kind of got into it first, and then somehow introduced Antti to the topic and field as well.
Okay, so you both live in, you live in the Netherlands now, but you're both from Finland. Is your focus all based around drugs policy and drugs generally in Finland? Like, or Antti, are you experiencing like other countries' drugs policy? Are you learning about psychedelic treatment in the Netherlands also?
Well, the training is, of course, somewhere else. Like the MAPS training was in Holland, actually, and Compass Pathways training was in Portugal. Of course, Compass Pathways is based in the UK, and I was involved in a healthy volunteer study in King's College for the psilocybin, and I both got my own psilocybin, and I was helping sitting with other clients or the healthy volunteers. So in that sense, I'm also in other countries, but mostly based in Finnish studies and Finnish. I'm not really in drug policies. I have been in a few podcasts with Aleksi actually, and I've given like the doctor's opinion that it doesn't really make sense to punish people to use drugs, especially because most of them are traumatized already. So because there's a strong correlation between trauma and addiction. So I think it's so stupid to punish people from escaping their emotions through drugs or something else.
Absolutely, yeah, I tend to agree on that one. could you explain a bit about how you actually use psychedelics in your therapy and in treatments with people? Because in my experience on the podcast so far, quite a lot of we have quite a mixed bag of listeners. Some people are very much pro drug use, and but there's also quite a lot of people that either are anti or at least have zero experience or understanding of it, especially in the medicinal side of things. So they only when they hear me or previous guests talking about psychedelics, often they're thinking their first thing that comes to mind is a recreational use.
So what was the question?
So could you explain a bit about the medical
the psilocybin or psychedelic therapy?
Yeah.
Okay, so well, the idea of psychedelic therapy is that, let's say, with the psilocybin or something like that, when people are treatment-resistant depression or really deep in a depression or even OCD or some like addictions or something, their thoughts are really going into these cycles, and there's no flexibility in their perspective, or there's not really flexibility in how to view the world. So, and there's this theory of the robust theory that the entropy in the brain, different brain regions and in the brain, is really slow or really low. So the idea of psychedelics is kind of like, well, open the mind and change the perspectives and get more flexibility, and like to get more connection between the different brain regions. So kind of like, and also because we have a lot of these armors or a lot of these like protections, we're trying to protect our mind, or we have different ways to survive. So kind of those walls or those armors goes away, and then so a lot of things from subconscious might come to your consciousness. So then you can't really escape your emotions. You can't really escape what you have been pushing down. So they kind of come to your consciousness, and it's just a safe place with the trained professionals to go through those emotions and go through those whatever you're experiencing. And then one of the most important thing is then integrate those what you have felt or seen, or even if it's like really anxiety provoking or really like tough, let's say not a bad trip but a challenging trip. It's if you can integrate it well, it can be really fruitful still. And what comes to MDMA and the trauma, and of course what we know already about MDMA, why it works so well for the trauma, well, basic answer is that it's kind of shuts down the amygdala, so the place in our brain that also always scans our environment and even our subconscious from a possible threat. So when you treat traumatized in a normal psychotherapy, they might get really overwhelmed, or then they might dissociate, or they will shut down because the trauma triggers them so badly. So with the MDMA, they can safely go through go towards the trauma and like get good results. So this is like in a nutshell.
Okay, I mean, it makes sense on the surface. What kind of risks do you have to cover? Because I mean, I'm guessing like mental health issues come into play in this.
Yeah, so far of course, because these are like quite preliminary studies, or these studies are still quite in the first, like in a phase 1 or 2, or well, MDMA is already in a phase 3, but still we want to avoid unnecessary risks. So there's a lot of factors that we exclude or what we include the patient. So let's say more major exclude issues are like if you have had psychotic episodes during your life, or if your close family, like parents or siblings, have had psychosis, like they are unfortunately at this point excluded out. Or if you have really like difficult heart conditions or kidney or liver or these kind of things, those are all excluding. And also at this point, most of the personality disorders are excluded, not because they couldn't be treated maybe one day, but more, let's say, if we would include unstable person in a study, and for some reason, whether it's because of the psychedelics or other reason, they would commit a suicide, it will look really bad in this preliminary study. So at the moment, people with personality disorders are excluded. Yeah, those are the main things I would say.
Okay, I remember from the last podcast with Aleksi, we talked quite a bit about the drugs policy in Finland, and I remember Aleksi, you were saying about about the cannabis research that you were doing there. Is it something that since we last spoke, are things changing? Like the fact that like Antti, you are able to do your work. Do you see that Finland is becoming more progressive, at least on the medical aspect of it?
Well, hopefully, and it seems that there's more talk about the topic, but so far, I don't know, have Aleksi told or did you know, but actually we haven't been able to start these studies in Finland because we have trying to apply the ethical approval for the compass pathway study 3 times to give psilocybin to treatment-resistant depression, but all those 3 times have failed. So there is still a lot of conservative thoughts, or really a lot of like taboos on this topic. So actually, we haven't been able to start these studies in Finland at all. So yeah, I would say we are still quite far from the wave where other people or other countries are going, but there's good discussions and good things going on.
And I could add that last week, or the 17th of February, there was an expert hearing in the Finnish Parliament Law Committee, because there was the cannabis decriminalization citizens initiative that managed to gather over 50,000 signatures. So it has sort of progressed into that they held an expert hearing. And what came out of that expert hearing was actually that the Finnish Institute of Health and Welfare, which is sort of the body that is looking into these things, was not for cannabis decriminalization, but they said that actually all drugs should be decriminalized, because decriminalization of only cannabis would make different user groups in an unequal kind of playing field. And there was few professors of criminal law that was also kind of supporting this view. I mean, of course, there was that one police that was like completely against it and presented some really weird statistics of cannabis-related deaths that apparently no world has really seen those, but in Finland they are apparently quite abundant. Every district has had several cannabis-related deaths in Finland. Apparently,
are they actually recorded? Like that
well,
is official
this
though?
Statement by the police. I mean, I don't know where he got this info, but he was showing that. I mean, he did sort of say in that statement that it has been, cannabis and other drugs and medicines that have caused death and suicide. So I mean, I can imagine that people that overdose, that they might be also cannabis users, but does that mean that cannabis has been a factor in the death of the person? So it's some sort of scaremongering, moral panic kind of thing, which is still quite prevalent, of course, here. But I was possibly not necessarily surprised, but the fact that the National Institute of Health and Welfare came out quite strongly saying that not just cannabis, but all drugs should be decriminalized. So we'll see where this is leading up to.
What kind of power do they have, or not necessarily power, but authority do they have in Finland? Do the government, are they obliged to listen to them?
Well, it is the sort of the expert body, and I mean, like the government is saying that, hey, we should, listen to these people when it comes to Corona, for instance. So I don't know why wouldn't they listen to them with this topic as well? I mean, they are the experts. If we don't base our policies on some sort of expertise, then I don't know what we're basing them on.
Also, one other thing what has happened in the last few years, actually, the Supreme Court has classified already psilocybin from few years ago from the class 1 to the class 2. So it's not like the most dangerous drug anymore. And actually a few months ago, I think it was, the LSD has been dropped from the class 1 drug to the class 2. So these kind of things has also happened in Finland.
Just to clarify, we don't really have similar classification system as UK and US, for instance, but indeed they said that it's not extremely dangerous, it's only dangerous. So it was a kind of like a small victory in that sense.
So how do the classification systems work there, and also what is the kind of the tolerance policy? Is it like because I've heard, I don't know about Finland, but I know like in Sweden and some of the other Nordic countries, it's quite like drugs should not be part of society at all. So that's the aim.
It's been really that kind of drug-free world, and I've been trying to kind of look into this. I mean, in a way, like illegal drugs in an illegal drug. If you're caught with anything, whether it's cannabis or heroin, you're kind of dealt the same way. I think with cannabis, for instance, you can get up to 6 months of prison time. And that's also exactly the same limit that if the crime is that scale, then the police has a right to enter your home and do like a search. And then, of course, if you get busted with cannabis on the street, and then that gives the police the right to go to your home, and then it's not just, you know, personal use, it might become another drug charge because maybe you have something at home or you have a plant there, and then it's not just personal use, it's production all of a sudden and that kind of stuff. And the police say that they don't go after users because of time and resources, but it's still, I think the latest, I think 2016 there was 15,000 crimes registered for just mere use and possession. I think that's been increasing. So I don't know what they do, but they definitely are quite effective of also charging users. There is a sort of, in the current law, sort of depenalization would be in practice possible, that a person can be directed into treatment. Most people don't want to because they don't really have the need for that. And of course, sort of steering everybody into the treatment sector is also not very effective because our healthcare is kind of suffering because of Corona, but they could just drop the charges, but it's not really used in practice. So depenalization would be a possibility, but it's not really a practice.
Is that everybody would be referred to treatment? So for example, a cannabis user would be then referred to treatment. Okay.
Indeed. And then they're like, yeah, but they don't want to go to treatment. Well, yeah, because I mean, there are people that would benefit from it, but most people, I don't think, would need treatment with this.
Well, no. I think the high humans thing is quite a good example of, you know, of showing that there are a number. In fact, in general, it seems like drug users are often misrepresented in society, and the majority of adults that use drugs use them responsibly. But obviously, it sells more newspapers to report on somebody overdosing or somebody using irresponsibly than reporting on somebody having a great time or somebody chilling and smoking a joint with their friends. So.
Yeah, and you can even end up a Columbia professor of psychiatry. I don't know if you've seen, like Carl Hart had a new book coming out, Drugs for Grown-Ups, and he's being sort of very vocal advocate already, of course, years, but he also admits to be a occasional heroin user, and you know, that's not a typical heroin user image that people have in their heads. But that's the thing, that it's stereotypes play a big role in these discussions, of course.
So both of you have worked with psychedelic microdosing, right? I remember you mentioned before, Aleksi.
Yeah, I had one study in my PhD, which was looking at microdosing as a phenomena on YouTube. But that's sort of it, and I've talked to people about it, of course, but there's not really actual studies, as Antti mentioned, that it's been very hard to do ethical approval. Although I do think that now at the University of Helsinki, they have done some animal studies with LSD recently. So I think things are opening up a bit. Of course, animal studies are a different thing than actual human clinical trials.
Especially when you're trying to find out about subjective experiences, I really need to go straight into human trials. What are the hoops that need to go through? Like you said, Antti, that you're kind of facing ethical issues. What are those mainly?
Well, I think the MDMA would be much easier to get through, but no, and we did try that we didn't try to get the approvals yet, but because there was so much bureaucracy, and I've been trying to do that the last 2 years to get that study started in Turku, in the other city of Finland. But actually, in the end, it seemed that because it took so long with the bureaucracies, the maps kind of told me a few months ago that, well, they said that they don't really have money that much in Europe. They have gotten pretty well money in the US, but they don't really have a lot of money. And since they got Norway already, so they have enough countries in Northern Europe, in the middle of Europe, and in the southern of Europe. So they said that they really actually don't need Finland anymore to join their multi-center studies, but they said that they would really want to collaborate still with other studies. So and I've been talking with the professors of psychiatry in Turku that should we do our own studies, and they are still open-minded to it, and they are, few of the professors are really like curious about the topic, and more I think the doctors, oh yeah, I got just publication in our Finnish medical journal about the Mdma assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. So that publication has, I think, so most of the Finnish doctors read the paper. So I think there's a lot of talk about the topic now in Finland. So I think it could be coming, that things will go forward. But now we just need a good research group, and probably the funding would be the next thing. Since MAPS is not going to fund it, so then we need a public funding from Finland, and I think it could happen. I mean, but that would be the biggest. I don't think that, like I said, I don't think the ethical approval for MDMA would be that difficult since it's already the phase 3.
Mm-hmm. Do you need like most of the doctors? It like at the moment it's more niche. So you have, is it just like a small select group of doctors that are really on board with this, and you need to get more?
Yeah, of course it would be beneficial to get more doctors and just more knowledge on the topic. But like I might live in a small bubble, since I know a lot of doctors, and many of the doctors that I know happen to be quite open-minded for psychedelics. But I don't think that's the issue, that we should get all the doctors on board. We just need to get the ethical approvals and the funding. So I would say those are the two main issues at the moment in Finland. But it will happen. It will happen.
And there is, for instance, the Finnish Psychedelic Research Association, and there's psychologists, there's doctors. I mean, I get that the topic is still something that people might feel uncomfortable really speaking out with their own name and face. But having those kinds of organizations that are promoting the science and, organizing different events. There was a really nice webinar on ketamine, for instance, which is something that even now is used in Finland.
How so?
For I'm not actually sure for what. I think depression and
acute depression for sure. Like if someone is really suicidal, they use ketamine. Well, not often, but more and more. It has pretty good results for the next week or two, or maybe sometimes 3 weeks to get the depression away completely. And then
what kind of dosage is this? Like treatment, not like to sedate somebody, but to give somebody a small dose of it?
Some people, it's an infusion, so anesthesiologist will come to give it. I think in Finland they use like 0.3 or 0.4 milligrams per kilogram. So some people do get a trip, but for some people it's more like they're just sedated for a while. And the thing is that so far there's not really ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So at the moment they just go to like a ward, and there's maybe a psychiatric nurse just sitting next to them, but there's not really talking or anything. They don't prepare them, and so then they get the ketamine, and then they will just check that they're okay, and then they maybe go back to the other ward. So there's not really, they don't use the possible open window for some kind of a therapy. So, but I have been talking about this also here in Finland, and I was in a radio with the Finnish psychiatric professor, who is also a leader of this evidence-based guidelines of depression in Finland. So we were talking about in that radio show that should we do like maybe a little bit higher doses for the ketamine and like prepare them for the trip, and then give them a little bit higher doses, and then like do the integration in the same way we would do the psilocybin or MDMA therapy. Since we already have the infrastructure and since we already have the knowledge of ketamine, like why don't we just that? And he was actually quite curious about that thought. So
okay, interesting. How long have you both been involved in this subject for, this field?
I kind of got interested in 2009 when I had to choose a bachelor thesis topic, and there was a government report about so-called involuntary treatment of drug moms. There was a big discussion about that back then, and I mean, I think I got advice from like, hey, choose a topic that's current, so I chose that, and I did my master thesis on the same topic as well before then moving to Amsterdam. And I kind of wanted to actually originally look into the same thing in the Netherlands. Of course, Finland and the Netherlands are kind of like quite the opposites when it comes to drug policy. The other one is very criminalization heavy, and the other one is more of a social and healthcare. So I kind of wanted to see how that would differ. But then one of the few first lectures in the medical anthropology and sociology program, they mentioned chemical enhancement. And I kind of got like, wow, what is that? I never heard of enhancement drug use. And because of, thinking about like drug moms and fetal alcohol syndrome and those kinds of quite heavy topics that I've been.
Is that the main thing of that, of your study?
Yeah, that was like my first bachelor and master thesis. So I spent like a few years just thinking about those quite grim topics. I mean, important and then difficult. And there's all kinds of questions when it comes to that. And then I think I kind of went to the other extreme and started looking at the beneficial use, because I thought it was more kind of positive and happy topic in a way. So then I kind of got into this enhancement drug use and been doing that ever since. And then kind of mixed up in drug.
What year was this?
I moved to Amsterdam 2012.
Yeah, so I think pretty soon after that you started to talk to me about this topic. So then I started to read about the articles, and we were talking about it with Aleksi. And first I remember I was a bit like, what? Like LSD or someone would get beneficial from that. And I was like, you're crazy man. But then more and more I went into it. And so then, yeah, I was kind of like, oh, this is really interesting. And actually my first actual how I started to work with psychedelics or these other mind altering drugs was I started to work in this voluntarily based company in Finland that gives like a psychcare kind of things in the Finnish psychedelic festivals. So like if someone in an underground festivals, people might use different kind of substances. So we have this big, huge like TP tent covered with mattresses and pillows and water and sodium and whatever, and then everyone in a festival knows that if someone is having a bad trip or if someone is like having some anxiety or anything, they can just bring it to us. So there was doctors and psychologists and psychiatric nurses, or just like psychonauts who can be lovingly present and sober for the festival guests. So I did that for few 2-3 summers, and actually through that this one psychologist and brain researchers heard that I have experienced with these topics. So then she asked me to join the 2016. They were starting their Finnish own study for treatment-resistant depression to compare double-blindedly ketamine and psilocybin. And actually that study, we got ethics approval from Helsinki University own, but then we never got money for that. So then Compass Pathways heard that we would want to study these. So then they asked us to join their multi-center study. For some reason, that study never got approved in it. But then we applied to this national ethic approval, not in a university's own ethical. I don't really know why did we even do that, but anyway, so the national level ethical committee didn't want Finland to collaborate in that study. And there are actually few reasons. For the first few times, they apparently said that we don't have enough evidence, or we don't have enough knowledge on the safety of the psilocybin. So then we were kind of like, oh, okay, sure. But then since in 2019, or was it over 2018, the King's College had that 96 healthy volunteer study to the phase 1 study, and they noticed in that study that actually, yeah, it's still safe. So then we were like, okay, let's apply again. But now the ethics committee said that now it's not about safety, it's about the protocol, that they don't like the protocol. And we were like, okay, sure, let's just, so they weren't ready. At least that committee wasn't ready. So after that, I've been trying to like popularize the topic. So like write these reviews and tried, I've been asked in many podcasts and many newspapers and others. So I've been just talking to get to change the attitudes of people and healthcare professionals. So
go on, Aleksi.
Just briefly, it was first semester when I went to Amsterdam, and a friend of mine hinted about a conference which was organized by Stichting Open, or Open Foundation, which is a Dutch psychedelic science foundation. And I went to their conference, and it was in a church, and the opening lecture was about entheogens, and I never heard about entheogens, and I didn't know what that was. And then I remember there was a study that came out that year about a review study of the former studies with LSD for alcoholism, which showed great progress. It was one of the biggest sort of things that they were studying. And like, I just remember thinking like, wow, do they know about this in Finland? Like, this would be great to try out, because alcoholism is definitely a big thing here. And then there was like the neuroimaging studies from Robin Carter Harris, and that one study by Matthew Johnson about quitting smoking with psilocybin. And that's been almost 10 years now. So these things have definitely developed in the last 10 years. And there's now multiple multi-sensor research facilities that are doing this kind of work. And I do believe that it will come to Finland as well, but it's not relying on Finland. So that's okay. But these things take time naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, like, culture changes quite slowly. Although, I mean, Corona has definitely told like we can also change things quite quickly. I mean, when it comes to, for instance, opioid replacement therapy, I've seen a lot of reports where, I mean, usually people that are dependent on opioids and get opioid replacement therapy medications, they've usually got it for a week. But then because of Corona, they're like, no, let's give them like a whole month of medication, which is something that patients and doctors have been advocating for forever, but that hasn't been really managed to do that. So I think Corona has shown that we can do things differently and quite rapidly if there's just enough kind of will to do it.
Okay. Do you think that it's also an age-related thing where you have the people who are either the policymakers, or I guess like in Antti's case, the people who are approving, say in the university or on the national scale, are from a previous generation with an outdated view of drugs, and then as the next generation, which have a more moderate view, come in, we're going to just see it liberalize more and more, and kind of just, I don't even know if liberalize is the right term, but just like be more open to this kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's this. I mean, probably those generations have been more influenced with the other propaganda, so they've been hearing that those stories, and of course they have also maybe seen. I mean, there are downsides or there are risks with these substances, but I think I don't know how big of the percentage of those risks. I think one big thing why they are so risky is that, first of all, you are usually using these in quite shady places because you are pushed you're an outsider. Yeah, and also I think those loops that am I gonna get caught? Am I gonna get caught? What if someone knows that I'm taking this? So I think all of those could be taken away if people wouldn't judge you, or if you wouldn't need to be afraid of using different substances. So I think that could already make a big influence. But yeah, I think the age thing might be one big thing.
Okay. Aleksi?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, for instance, our national survey definitely shows that people that are younger do accept drug use and, you know, promote or sort of are more for not punishing people who use drugs. And I think in our current government, there's the Left Party and Green Party that have been having in their program, for instance, decriminalization. The Green Party had a discussion whether they should go for full legalization, but they didn't really dare. But then again, from all the youth political parties, from basically the whole spectrum has come out saying that we should at least decriminalize and we should actually even legalize cannabis, for instance. So indeed, when those people that are now in the youth party eventually will hopefully, you know, be in the power position to start making changes, then the change will happen. And of course, the cannabis decriminalization initiative, even though maybe it won't pass, we don't really know, but at least it has created that discussion that's been really needed, because without that, nothing's going to change.
I just wanted to add from the topic what Aleksi started about the psilocybin and other psychedelics to give for addiction. I think also it's really interesting study what Francesca has been doing in the UK to give MDMA for addicts, in the sense that, like what I said in the beginning, that there's a really strong correlation between trauma and addiction. So there's many people are escaping their trauma or their emotions through different kind of substances. So if we would treat the root cause of the reason why they are using these substances or the trauma, so then instead of drinking alcohol or using other drugs, they could be just free from the suffering. So then they wouldn't need to really get addicted anymore. So that's also really interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I that it's quite obvious when I look at, you know, the statistics and even knowing people who have been addicted to drugs or who have issues with the drugs. There's always been a deep-rooted, you know, it's not just the drug, it's, you know, it's a coping mechanism for something else. But I think that just takes a lot more work, a lot more time, and a lot more money, which is often quite difficult. You know, I mean, if I'm sure you know, both of you, how hard it can be to get funding for research, let alone, you know, imagine rolling out national treatment for people and treating with trauma rather than just locking people up. That's probably the easy answer, I guess.
Yeah, and that's also actually one thing that I'm planning to do a PhD on, or the first article I'm thinking to do is that we have already talked with a few professors to kind of like go through also these different psychiatric like diagnoses, so like different treatment-resistant depression or treatment-resistant borderline personality or unstable personalities or general anxieties or other those like that are really treatment resistant. So we would give them, or the nurse or psychologist would go through those people with this structural questionnaire called CAPS-5. So the CAPS-5, they're using it now in the MDMA PTSD study. So basically, if you get enough points, so high points from the CAPS-5, it's almost the same as you have PTSD. So I think we have a lot of people in our psychiatric wards or that we are trying to cure. The root cause is actually the trauma, and the symptoms, it just varies so much. So many of the psychiatric diagnoses, they overlap. So many of them has probably misdiagnosed. So I think that would be also quite interesting to find out if we have actually more people who are traumatized. So then if we would change the focus from, let's say, symptom releasing to the root cause of the trauma, maybe they could get themselves out of the loop.
Just to add quickly, because you mentioned Ben Sessa, I've seen him talk a few times, and he has this great point where we have all this sympathy or empathy or both for traumatized children. Like, they're really the victim that we have all this empathy for. But once that child turns 18 and maybe, uses something, a drug or something to deal with that trauma, then we give them a criminal charges and ship them off to prison. So like there's that really big discrepancy between those populations in that sense.
How have you found living in the Netherlands with, as a contrast to your experiences then with this kind of thing?
I think there's a big mindset difference that I always need to kind of adjust to. While being in the Netherlands, things are just quite open and liberal, and things are I mean, of course, Netherlands has their own issues when it comes to drugs. It's not like the perfect paradise when it comes to drug policy, for instance. But it takes a bit of time when I come to Finland, and I need to remember that, okay, this is a bit more taboo, so maybe I shouldn't talk about this or behave in certain ways in situations where it's okay, or I feel like it's okay normally when I'm in Amsterdam. So and language, of course, is a big part of it. I mean, the Finnish language has really big distinction. I mean, drug in English can mean medicine or it can mean other types of drugs, but in Finland it's really kind of like either huume, which is the illegal one, or lääke, which is medicine. And of course, people use both of them mixed up in different kinds of ways. So it's kind of difficult to even talk about that. And in my PhD, I kind of tried to bring this idea that they're all tools or technologies that people use in order to improve their situation, whatever that is. They have risks, of course, and sometimes their use can lead into problems, but nobody uses drugs for their harm. They try to get the benefits. They might get some harms at the same time, but it's still something that they use in order to try to improve their situation, even though for a very short time. But it's still kind of there, and we need to start talking about the at least perceived benefits that people get from drugs. If you want to do any kind of intervention, you need to know why people are doing it in order to then plan a good intervention. Because I mean, otherwise you'll just continue doing that just say no kind of drug hysteria that hasn't really been effective in keeping, for instance, the levels of use down. They've been going up for decades already.
Also, one more adding for the trauma and addiction. I think it was really beautiful when I once saw Kapor Mate giving an interview about trauma and addicted people. He actually uses that. He says to the people that I'm so happy that you found these drugs because they might have kept you alive. They might have kept you through those really hard times, and you have been able to escape, that you haven't done suicide or you haven't done other things. So he's really changing the perspective to the other way, and it was really beautiful.
Is that's in referral to like literally like heroin addicts, and because he works down with East Hastings, right in Vancouver, with lots of crack, cocaine, and heroin and meth. So I guess that's talking about even the extreme cases. The fact that you survive is good.
There's a Finnish sociologist, Kettil Bruun, who wrote a book already in the 70s, like drugs are a good enemy. Like you can blame almost everything on drugs, and then that sort of allows you not to look at the wider systemic kind of thing. Because I mean, like people in East Hastings that are meth addicts, for instance, it's not necessarily the meth that is causing the problems. They probably indeed have trauma, they're unemployed, they don't have a housing, and then it's just a way of coping with that situation. It's not something that necessarily led them into that situation.
Yeah. Is it because how does alcohol play into this in Finland? Because as far as I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's quite a problem, alcoholism, right? Especially with the short summers and the it's dark.
I mean, it's expensive, but still people manage to get their hands on it quite a lot. I mean, people go to Estonia or Russia, get it cheap there, and that's the thing. Like, if if health would be the argument for drug policy, then we should not be talking about decriminalization of cannabis and other drugs. We should talk about decriminalization of alcohol and tobacco, for instance. If like if health is the measure that we use, then that should be the discussion, but it's not, of course, because they are somehow the normal ones or the approved ones in that sense.
But this is also a change with the youngsters. Since I work with the young people, there's really a different
Can you Alex mute your?
Yeah, sorry.
Mute your.
Yeah.
So youngsters don't really like to use alcohol anymore. So the alcohol usage of the people in Finland is like going down and down when the people are getting younger and younger. Of course, there might be some other drugs like cannabis or other drugs, but they're not. It's not rising. Other drugs are not rising as fast as the alcohol is going down. So I think young people are really getting sick of well, maybe they have seen enough alcohol in this country, so they really will stop using it. So that's really cool.
It's quite an interesting that you said about crossing over the border to go get alcohol. Like it's very reminiscent of drugs. Drugs it is a drug, but I mean of illegal drugs. How alcohol is expensive, so therefore people are going to look for it if they can't afford it, so therefore they cross to Estonia or Russia, which I know that's quite an interesting concept, because as someone like from the UK where alcohol is extremely cheap, and in the Netherlands you don't really consider it like that. It just becomes this normal thing that is affordable by everybody, really. I've actually got a couple of questions here in the comments, so I will ask these. The first one is random, but what do you guys think of Dr. Carl? You already mentioned Dr. Carl Hart. Dr. Carl Hart, who takes heroin recreationally but disagrees with microdosing.
Sorry, what's the last part about microdosing?
Question is, what do you think of Dr. Carl Hart, who takes heroin recreationally but disagrees with microdosing? I wasn't aware of that he disagreed with microdosing, to be honest, but yeah, this is a question in the comments.
I mean, I met him once when I was in New York, and I briefly talked with him about psychedelic research that was going on. He was quite skeptical, and I think he gave a talk about this as well not too long ago. But I mean, he's a scientist who really goes and sees what the data says. And I mean, with microdosing, still it is a bit of a there's not too much really robust clinical research on this. So I mean, I think he's why wouldn't he be skeptical if he been spending decades researching drugs, and it's not like he's just going to jump on some sort of microdosing wagon all of a sudden. And I mean, I think he has mentioned that it's not just heroin that he uses recreation, but also ecstasy and cannabis and stuff like that. So I think he's been very brave of speaking about this, and I bet he's not the only Ivy League professor who has done recreational drug use, but he's the most outspoken and brave when it comes to this.
I find it's very difficult, because I agree with what you're saying about the data with microdosing, but I find it very hard, because it's something that even though there aren't many studies across official studies, there is a lot of anecdotal, I say evidence, I don't know what you want to call it. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, so I guess it's not really evidence, but there are just, in my own personal experience, my little bias here is I am involved in the microdosing industry. I have a microdosing company, but we have so many people come to us and say, I mean, it is a lot of people. Some people honestly say it doesn't help them, but just so many people do say, how it changes their life. You both answer your first.
Yeah, for that, I would like to bring a point of view that I just saw a headline of the study where they showed that if you are expecting a good positive outcomes from the microdosing, then there's higher chance of getting them, which brings us to the power of placebo, and of course we want to use the placebo in everything we do, but and I'm pretty sure there are effects more of than the placebo, but like if we can add the microdose and the placebo, then it would be amazing. But I think there might be also a lot of from those anecdotals that from the information that people say, oh, with these microdoses, I feel amazing, I feel energized, I feel. So if you are thinking that you will get these, then there's higher chance to get them also.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to point out, it's kind of similar with, for instance, medical cannabis. There's so many reports and patient stories about the benefits, but there's not too many phase 3 randomized controlled studies about it, which doesn't mean that those anecdotal reports are not true or that people don't find it actually to be very beneficial. It's just very hard to convince doctors, for instance, about this if there isn't that kind of studies done about this, and it's hard to do those studies if there's no funding, or it's very difficult to do if they're on a schedule, whatever, that it's difficult to do those studies. But we have a book coming out in about a month, a Finnish book on medical cannabis, where we wrote that with a psychiatrist, a Finnish psychiatrist, and we try to look at the science, but also we did include so-called anecdotal real life stories with it as well, because we think those are also valuable. And there's something called real world evidence, which could be also used to gather information and knowledge about this, that indeed people are doing this, they are microdosing, they are using all kinds of things, but of course they don't necessarily know what they're using necessarily. But it doesn't mean that we can try to harness that knowledge and try to systematically gather that and then present that. If randomized control studies are really expensive and difficult to do, then why not just indeed use this kind of citizen science where people are doing it anyway? So let's collaborate and try to bring more information about it.
Could you have some kind of, I guess, not anonymous, but some kind of wide net study across, various countries, various spectrums of society, looking at the effects of, say, of microdosing, and have it so that the questions that are asked, so there's no bias amongst other people, because I feel that could be like the argument that is against it. It's like, well, yeah, like you're expecting this. You've read online that they say it increases your creativity, so therefore, would there be some way of like creating some kind of like an online portal where you log in and you take part in this study, but the part of it isn't shared elsewhere until all the data is collected?
I think Beckley Foundation had some sort of a protocol at some point where they don't provide the substance, but they sort of provide a platform where you can give information. There's different experiments that you do maybe while you are microdosing yourself, for instance. I don't think they've published those yet, but that was kind of an interesting protocol. But I do think I was looking into it, and it seemed that a person that takes part of that needs to have quite a lot of motivation and effort in order to really, go through the whole protocol. So there's always going to be a bit of a bias of like who takes part in these kinds of studies, because they can be time consuming at least.
And I think in that same protocol that you're saying, they tried to they send it some instructions to how you can even make it double blinded, so that in every other day, or that they said that divide the 7 days and only put the microdose in few of them, and randomly, I haven't really seen, I've just seen that they are trying to make it double blind, so you don't know in each day whether you're taking the microdose or not. So then and then you evaluate like how was the day and how was this day, and then the platform can see, oh, actually this day you didn't get it and you still felt something, and other way around. So
but it is like in psychedelic research they talk about set and setting, and that's of course when it comes to this important as well. And that I think that kind of knowledge about set and setting should be looked into with everything, even with alcohol. Like it is different, what you use it for and where you're doing it. And I think in consumption in general, I mean, like we should be more mindful of what we consume. Why are we doing it? Where are we doing it? What's the impact of that? Because even with drugs like MDMA or cocaine, which both of them have environmental impact and they impact different chains of production and all that kind of stuff. So I would try to, I don't know, advocate for awareness of consumption in any kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from that setting, what I've already learned and what I've already tried to talk with other doctors and really many agree, we can already learn from this setting what we have learned from psychedelics is that, let's say we give patients antidepressants, like let's say they have a depression or they have anxiety, and let's say, of course, there's always reasons why they have these, but let's say there's a really good reasons that, or that their family is really disturbed, or that there's a lot of fighting, or that there's a lot of this and this and this. You don't want to give antidepressants then, and then they go back, because the setting makes so that if there's a neuroplasticity, it might cause that the patterns and the way you think and the way you work, they just get like thicker and thicker. So you want to change the setting, of course, that's maybe quite obvious, but if you're not able to change the setting, then you don't probably even want to give the antidepressants at all, because it might be bad, and we might just like put the symptoms under the mattress, and then it will never get cured actually. But yeah.
I've just got another question coming through as well, so I hope you don't mind. Yeah, people asking away. It's quite. I think this is such an interesting topic. There's just so many different paths it can go down. Once you start scratching beneath the surface. The next question we've got actually is, what do you think the abuse and addiction to legal medication? Why do you think the abuse and addiction to legal medication is never taken as seriously?
That's a good question. I know from a Finnish PhD publication that indeed, like Finland has about 230 drug deaths annually, approximately, and in I think over 50% of those, it's been a combination of a medication and drugs.
What's
or
alcohol?
Alcohol.
What is where does alcohol come in relative to that? If the 200 are not alcohol included, right?
No, I don't think alcohol is included in this. I think they looked at kind of as a separate thing. And I'm not entirely sure which medications. I would imagine like benzodiazepines would be one. And Antti and I have been actually working on a paper at elderly patients and their medication use and the risk that comes with polydrug use when you're over 70 and you're being prescribed 5 to 7 different drugs which have different kind of combinations, and then that becomes quite risky as well. So I do think that it comes to this kind of like, what do we do, or what do we include in the term drugs? Like we exclude alcohol and tobacco and also all these other kind of medications which are still so widely used. So I think there's definitely a need for including these into the discussion.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. That's
where do you think over the next few years, like are you feeling hopeful about everything? Do you still feel, I mean, obviously there's like it's still a massive hurdle, but I'm guessing because of your commitment you must see light at the end of the tunnel.
With the psychedelic studies in Finland, you mean?
Yeah. And in general with like kind of the change.
Well, in general, I'm really hopeful, and I'm like Aleksi said, there's tons and tons of studies going on now in new and more countries are participating, and so in worldwide, I'm really optimistic that this wave is big enough, and sure, also in Finland, for me, I have to admit personally, there's quite a lot of things on my plate now, so I'm really not focusing on psychedelic studies at the moment. Maybe slowly but surely, I'm trying to push some boundaries, but there are of course other people than me in Finland who can push these things to move forward, but things can happen in the next few years, but I'm not really, at some point it will come here, but I'm happy that other countries are doing these studies.
I think is the US at the forefront right now?
Yeah, US, I would say Holland also. Holland, US, Canada, Israel, they are, and now Australia are starting pretty huge studies also. But I think those are the countries that are pushing it the most.
I mean, I'm optimistic by nature, I guess, but also been involved so long in this already, and knowing that things take so long for them to change, and even when they change, they might be 2 steps ahead and 3 steps back. But I think I need to keep believing that indeed there's a light at the end of the tunnel, because otherwise you would just get too depressed, and it's not. Couldn't do this if I didn't believe that there's sort of at least hope for change, and who knows, we might be heading for another summer of love or something like that. It seems like we are in some sort of cultural change when it comes to these things, and we just need to learn from mistakes in the past, and in order to make that change peaceful and make that transformation into something that benefits most people. And I mean, indeed, it's not on the shoulders of just a few individuals. There's so many centers and researchers and great individuals doing this work, and the media has been mostly positive about it as well. So there's not too many scare stories of LSD causing some sort of genetic malfunction or something like that. That was the case, in the 60s and 70s when things got banned. So I do think that we are kind of on our way to a good direction, but future is hard to predict, of course. So it might still take decades, but hey, there's plenty of time in this universe. So
yeah, I think that social media and the internet actually have a good opportunity of having a positive role in this, because normally I see quite a negative with social media and aspects of the internet, but I'm quite active on Reddit. There's the r/psychedelics and research chemicals, and you have tens of thousands of people writing trip reports, people helping in harm reduction, and then that you have YouTube channels popping up which start growing in popularity, with giving like way less of a bias, or maybe they are biased maybe towards drugs, whereas before before any of that existed, you would only hear stories from the media which often would be negative stories, because that is almost glamorizing it, the negative side.
And I think that, the danger then it is that it goes too much to the other side, like thinking that these will sort of solve everything and everybody should do this for breakfast or whatever. Like it's just sort of it's necessary to also keep in mind that they are very powerful tools to use, and you need to do them wisely and in a kind of smart way. Because otherwise the backlash can come easily if there's usually the governments, for instance in the Netherlands, they don't really care what people do unless somebody dies, and then they have to intervene, and they usually intervene by banning things because they don't really know what else to do with it, or because they're not just maybe not educated about it, but still. So things need to happen in a safe way.
Well, we've done just over an hour. I've thought this is absolutely really interesting. I'm really glad to have you both here, to be honest. I wanted to get you on the podcast for a while, Antti, and Aleksi's obviously said lots of good things about you. Understandably, also maybe he's biased, but definitely worth having you on. It's been great. I'd love to do it again, and maybe discuss more of your cognitive hypnotherapy and holotropic breath work and stuff. That's something that also is extremely interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And it was a pleasure to be your guest.
Is there anything, would you both like to have finish a statement, anything you want to recommend people check out, or where we can find any of your papers or any work that you've done, or any shout out at the end?
Well, like I said, I got that publication with my colleague about Mdma assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, and it is open access in Finland. People can read it if you just Google in Finland Mdma, like in Finnish, of course. So they but no, nothing major to add.
Well, indeed, my latest stuff are also in Finnish. I don't know how many Finnish viewers we have at the moment, but indeed, there's a book on medical cannabis coming. One of my publications in my PhD is a case study of a medical cannabis patient for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so ADHD. So that is open access. So if you Google my name, medical cannabis and ADHD, that should pop up. And I just wanted to sort of apologize for us being a bit late. There was a bit of confusion about time zones, and also we're making a hole in the ice in the lake behind us because we're gonna do Wim Hof on steroids. So we're gonna go to the 80-degree sauna, and then we're gonna jump into the icy lake.
Oh, brilliant! I'm so jealous. So is that what you're going to be doing now?
Yeah.
Yes. Really? Wow. How cold is it out there?
The water is always +4. So. But the outside temperature is actually not that bad. I think that's also like maybe +1, 2. So it's not that freezing anymore. But
okay.
A few weeks ago it was -25. So then it was a bit cold.
Wow.
Okay. But thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will speak to you both soon. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
You too.
You've been listening to Shifty Perspective. This has been an absolutely interesting podcast. Great. We've had Antti and Aleksi Hupli. Make sure you tune in, check out all of our other stuff. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out.